Shalom, this is Gidon Ariel, together with Bob Odell behind the camera, and we are happy to be in Rabbi Dov Ben Shor's study room in our community of Ma'aleh Hever. And shalom to you, Rabbi Ben Shor.
Shalom. Gidon. Harav Gidon. Ariel.
We're very happy to interview you a year or two ago, and we took this opportunity with Bob back in Israel to talk to you again. We'd like to talk to you about the institution that you are affiliated with, the nascent Sanhedrin. Could you tell us a little bit more about, or for our viewers who are tuning in for the first time, tell us the elevator pitch about the Sanhedrin?
Okay, well, it's a work in progress, as is almost everything in the world. The concept is, unfortunately, I haven't been active in the last short period of time because of other issues with my kids, but that's a whole different issue. So I won't talk about specific things that we've been doing recently, but the idea of the Sanhedrin is an important idea, and it's an important part of the redemption. It's an integral part of the redemption, and according to several sources, Tara de Eliyahu and Perkei de Eliezer, and those other books that I could rattle off for you, the Sanhedrin has to exist before the Mashiach, the Messiah, comes, because they have to actually anoint the Messiah. Mm-hmm. A king needs to be anointed by the people. He's chosen by God, anointed by the people. It's kind of like a democratic theocrat, something. It works both ways. I mean, all of the people have to accept him. It has to, there's a democratic aspect to it, at least by the elders of the people.
So the point of the Sanhedrin is to anoint the Messiah.
That's one of their functions. Mm-hmm. The Great Sanhedrin doesn't have a lot of functions, actually. Their main function is kind of like a Supreme Court in America, right? They when there is a question about a law, they will define the law. When the local, there's Sanhedrin is a term which really means council, and we can talk about the roots of where the term comes from. Some people think it's a Greek term. Some people say it's Martin Norris will tell you how it's an Aramaic term. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter. Okay, basically the Torah itself talks about small courts and great courts, right? So every local community had a small court, a small Sanhedrin, which it needs to have a certain population, of course, but there was the population. Every tribe had a Sanhedrin, a small Sanhedrin of 23 judges, and they would more or less adjudicate local law. They were the analogy, and it's a pretty good analogy because the founding fathers of America took the analogy and applied it to America. Would be the states versus the federalism of the United States. So there was, and especially if you talk about before the Civil War, when states were much more autonomous, and they have the Supreme Courts, but any discrepancy between the various tribes, or that the tribes were unable to know what the actual law is, they would come to Jerusalem, to the Chamber of Hewn Stone, the Lishkat HaGazit, and ask the Sanhedrin for that. There were also certain major things that applied to the entire nation that the Sanhedrin dealt with, and they learned all day. They were the leaders. They were the elders that came together in Jerusalem. So one of their functions, and only their function, is the anointing of a king. Okay? And it's important that they do it. They're representing the entire nation to actually anoint the king. They're the elders that are mentioned in the Torah that anointed David, that anointed Shaul, right?
In Hebrew, that's Zikanim.
Zikanim, yeah, in Hebrew. But yeah, so they're the elders. So the Sanhedrin's necessary. It also needs to, especially considering the years of exile that we've been in, the Sanhedrin represents unity of the Jewish people, because all the various elders from all the various groups of Jews need to come together and determine what is the baseline halakha. True, you in your customs over here in Ma'aleh Hever are going to express the law in a certain way, and over in Tel Aviv they're going to express the law in a different way. All right, but there needs to be a baseline as to what that is. So when I go to Tel Aviv, I'm able to fulfill the Torah law.
Pardon me for interrupting. Does that not exist today, do you think? It seems to me that Orthodox Jews, again, obviously we're talking about people who accept the idea,
The yoke of Torah, right?
the yoke of the Torah. They could go anywhere in the world and ask, where is there a synagogue for me to go pray? And they will be praying more or less in the same way. Can I eat where's the kosher restaurant? I mean, that's more or less all.
To some extent it exists today, to a large extent it exists today, because what happened was, during the Second Temple period,
Which is almost 2,000 years ago.
Right.
Over.
Basically, they created, they did something that they were not allowed to do, right? Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, the prince, Rabbi Yehuda the prince, did something for the sake of Torah. He violated Torah, which is a standard, only extreme circumstances. But basically, they set down the oral law, codified the oral law. There's a discrepancy between two versions of a letter from the Goanim as to whether he wrote it down or he simply codified it. It doesn't really make a difference. The fact is that he set the oral law. That's what we call now the Mishnah and the Talmud. So it's set, but there's also customs and other things in there. First of all, the oral law needs to be a little bit more open and flexible. There's a certain rigidity that enters in when you codify a law. Now it's built in a certain amount of flexibility here and there, but there needs to be more. And also new situations arise, and we keep coming up with, well, we don't know. We'll wait until we get here. And unfortunately, because we've been in the exile, most of the law that's applied to us has been things that have been very personal. The Dalet Amot of Halacha, the 4 cubits of Halacha, is an exilic statement. When you talk about the 4, that's Reshut Yachid. That's a private domain, and therefore the 4 Amot cubits of law is an exilic idea. It's a personal idea, and we don't want that.
I think if I'm not mistaken, the sages even had a phrase: ever since the destruction of the table, God has nothing but those.
God's presence, the Shekhinah, right?
Okay, God's presence has nothing but those 4 cubits of Jewish law,
and that's not a good thing.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a temporary 2,000-year temporary situation where we deal with what is the Rabbanut today, the chief rabbi of Israel? They deal with kashrut. They deal with holidays, Shabbat, conversions, and all these are sometimes under attack, but we don't need to get into those various things. But Halakha applies to business. It applies to business ethics. It applies to how you run a country. Mm-hmm. It has to whether you can sell arms to a different group.
Country.
Right? It tells whether you can do all these various things fall under a Torah rubric, which really needs to be delved into. The 4 amot cubits of halakha is not an ideal situation. It's a situation of exile. And while physically, thank God, we are not in exile anymore, we are in our land, and there's the gathering of the exiles and things like this, we are still operating on an exilic mindset, especially the religious people, especially us. We still have this mindset of insular, and even insular from other communities within Israel. And while there has to, we're in a process of a transition. We're seeing it happen, and we, being of the modern era, are impatient. But we've waited 2,000 years, and really in the last 100, things have been at light speed compared. So it really is actually progressing and unfolding, and it's a generational thing, just like the generation of the desert, right? True. We supposedly could have merited coming in right away, but there is something to this idea that, also God also doesn't make mistakes, right? And he also knows what's going to happen before it happens. So the whole plan was involved anyway. And the idea that the generation of the exile has to pass on, we even see this with going into exile. It goes both ways. We saw this last week, where the generation that came down to Egypt died off before they were really descending into Israel. That's why the verb is in the present tense. Habayim lemitzrayim, because it's a process of exile.
You're talking about these are the names of the people of the children of Israel coming to Egypt, as you translated Habayim, as opposed to who came
It's in
to
present
Egypt.
tense. We're in the
It's present perfect, I think it's called, something like that.
Yes, and it's present perfect, which means it's a continuing coming.
Right. Present continuous. Exactly.
Which is
So to summarize, you're saying that the Sanhedrin that you are representing here is a body that was formed in order to help bring the Jewish people and perhaps the entire world closer towards the.
not perhaps, but okay. I mean, the idea is the entire world. Shechem Echad.
I didn't hear you say that before, so that's why
Okay. Okay.
So let me start again.
I'm sorry.
The Sanhedrin that you and your colleagues have established is there in order to help facilitate the bringing of the Jewish people and the entire world closer to an optimal redemptive state of activities in this world,
Yes.
including how all Jews should act on a national level and not only on the individual level that they've been acting over the past 2,000 years according to the way that the Jewish law has developed, but also and perhaps most uniquely in crowning the King Messiah when he will arrive.
Yeah, I mean, we're not doing that tomorrow because there has to be a national consensus. I mean, the Sanhedrin, as it stands now, is more or less an idea. The idea is to get I mean, it's more than an idea. We're actually operating. However, the idea is to get the ball. I mean, who needs to be sitting in the Sanhedrin are really the representatives of all the Jewish people, the big rabbis,
Yes.
the rabbis that have thousands of followers, right? Eventually, what's ideally is that they have to realize that they have to give up some of their smaller autonomy and become part of the larger Klal Yisrael and the Klal the of the world. I mean, ideally, where's the UN supposed to be? I mean, the UN, right, is supposed to be out of Jerusalem. From Jerusalem will come Torah, where the Hague that would be the Sanhedrin. Whereas the nation, our job, which isn't we don't do it in exile. In the exile, we're running. Right? But our job as Jews is to be the priests of the world, to be the light unto the nations. We're supposed to be the example of ethics and morality and truth. We're supposed to help them, not rule them like, not to rule over them as dictators, Has v'shalom, but to every other nation has to have their own court system. They have to have their own system according to their own cultural, ethnic, people moralities. With certain basic moral guidelines that, of course, almost everybody accepts as moral